We'll be starting in just 1 minute. Right. Well, my name's Melissa Kamanya. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are here to review the $5.7 million for affordable housing development pre-application webinar. For your information, this is being recorded and will be available for viewing after today's training. So if you have any questions um, that were asked, we will have them available in a Q&A process or frequently asked questions. Any questions asked today will be published for future attendees or interested parties to review. I'm joined today with Rachel Baker, our Housing Division Manager, and between the two of us, we'll be answering all your questions. All right. Rachel, can you confirm that you can see my slideshow, please?
I sure can.
Great. Then with that, we will continue. All right. Just a few housekeeping tips. You are muted when you join the meeting. There will be natural breaks in the presentation where I will pause and ask questions. If you have a question, you will need to raise your hand using that raise hand function. And then when you are done speaking, please put your hand back down. All right. A quick overview of the timeline. This is available on our website in our request for proposals accordion tab on our affordable housing website. Today, starting at the far left, is our pre-application webinar. As I mentioned, on May 29th, any questions that are asked today will be posted on our website. Applications open June 5th and close June 25th. In that application window, we will have 2 additional FAQ postings on the website. So please email housing@bendoregon.gov your questions. We will answer them in a public format where everyone will have the opportunity to read the same guidance given. As I mentioned, applications due June 25th. July 9th, please be prepared to present your applications to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. That date, the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, or AHAC, will not only hear your presentations, but they will also make recommendation to City Council. They'll deliberate and then make their recommendations. For CDBG funding, we'll talk about this a little bit further in the presentation, but because CDBG funding is being offered outside of our annual cycle, we will have to make an annual action plan amendment, which requires some public noticing. That period is July 10th to August 8th. Moving forward, all you need to know about that is it's a standard practice. The city has done this before. It's just an amendment to allocate these extra funds, the $200,000. City Council will make their recommendations and final decisions on the pro-housing funding and the affordable housing funding on August 6th. And then after that public comment period closes and the annual action plan amendment is completed, then City Council makes their recommendations on the CDBG funding on August 20th. At the top of the slide, you see that what we are offering is a stacked funding bucket, if you will, $4 million in pro-housing funds, $1.5 million in affordable housing funds, and $200,000 in community development block grant funds. The 2 little asterisks at the bottom is very important for you all to understand. This entire schedule and offerings are dependent upon Bend City Council's approval of the funding allocation process for pro-housing on June 4th, and we will talk about that again in a second. Okay, I think most of you have seen this slide before, but this slide shows you our CDBG consolidated plan funding priorities. So for the years 2023 to 2027, the City of Bend has, through our consolidated plan process, prioritized 5 different areas of where funding will be allocated. This funding offering also has to comply with one of these 5 funding priorities. And when we talk about the Affordable Housing Fund, Pro Housing Fund, and CDBG for this offering, priorities 2, priorities 4, and potentially priority 5 will be the only arms that we will be talking about. We will not be doing public services, arm 3, and while absolutely we will accept projects that build these, it's not quite what this offering is looking for, and we will talk about that in the next few slides. Okay. I'm going to pause here. Rachel, I'm going to ask you to monitor for any hands raised on scheduling questions. Anybody have any questions on scheduling? Okay,
I
if
don't see
not,
any hands raised.
thank you. Okay, then let's talk about the Pro Housing Fund, which is why we are all here today. Just a quick, really quick summary of the Pro Housing Fund. I'm just going to catch you up very quickly on our timeline. In October 23, the City of Bend applied for $10 million in Pro Housing funding. In June of 24, we were notified that we received half of our request, or $5 million. In September 24, Bend City Council authorized the acceptance of the Pro Housing Grant. February 25, the Pro Housing Action Plan was approved by HUD. So just so you all know, we were given time to rescale our vision for the grant and to realign it with reduced funding. So half of the funding, what could we do with that? That was finally approved by HUD in February of 2025. In May of 25, the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee recommended that we issue the full amount of the fund, or $4 million of the fund in the first year, which is right now. And next, the June 4th, 2025 is the next milestone where Bend City Council will be hearing a resolution to offer that $4 million fund in this competitive process. A few other things we'd like you to know about the fund. It is intended to be offered through competitive application cycles with the annual Community Development Block Grant and Affordable Housing Fund offerings. The reason that this is proposed is that we understand limits to affordable housing is funding. That is a big limitation. And by stacking this $4 million fund with available affordable housing and CDBG funds, our intention is to extend the reach for developers to have access to larger funding pools. We are utilizing our existing competitive application process for soliciting proposals and awarding funds. So for those of you who are familiar with the City of Bend processes, this is no different. This is not a new process. Development activities supported by the Pro Housing Fund include land acquisition, infrastructure, homebuyer assistance, new housing construction, and other housing related costs related to households earning 80% of the area median income or less. The Pro Housing funds are federal funds, and for CDBG fund awardees, you will note that new housing construction, typically that is not allowed with CDBG funds. The Pro Housing Fund does have a special allocation or a special consideration where it can be used for new housing construction. We'd also like you to understand, though, that to reach City Council goals for affordable housing development and to demonstrate the Pro Housing Grant's value to our community, applications for land acquisition will be prioritized for the $4 million from the Pro Housing Fund. The goal of this is that the funds will be targeted for developments with a high feasibility of success, low risk for non-compliance issues regarding requirements for spending federal funding. Also, we're looking for near-term deadlines, which without additional funding would be unable to proceed. That June 4th resolution specifies that support with this fund is to be by loans and not grants. The idea here is by offering this fund as a loan with favorable terms, as opposed to grants, repayments can be refunneled into future application cycles. This will give us a long-term impact on this grant award through housing and community development needs. What this means for you is that the City of Bend loan policy applies. And I saw a hand raise. I'm going to answer that question in just a moment because I think your question might be about the City of Bend grants versus loans policy. And we're going to talk about that before I get to questions. The City of Bend existing policy on loans and grants says that funding it is our policy that City of Bend provides assistance in the form of grants for public services projects and loans for all other projects. Remember, I mentioned public services projects are not included in this funding application. This application includes pro-housing, CDBG, and affordable housing, which are to be offered as loans only. Loan terms from our existing City of Bend loans versus grants policies are as follows. I'm not going to read this word for word, but I will hover on this slide for just a moment. These are our standard loan terms. These are not different than what we have offered in years past. And this policy is available, and it is a requirement for you as an applicant to read the policy and check the box that you've read it when you are applying for funding. It's available in a hyperlink in the application process, so you can read it in more details at that time. But we do want you to understand that alternate terms are an option. All loan recipients may request shorter repayment timeframes without prepayment penalty. And developments that repay within 5 years can qualify for 0% interest with AHAC and City Council approval. Please also note that alternate terms may be requested in your funding application with an explanation as to why those alternate terms are needed. AHAC and City Council make those final recommendations and decisions on loan terms and funding awards. That's not city staff that make those decisions. Going to pause here because I did see a hand up. And let's see here. I see a question in the Q&A. Okay. Someone asked, what is considered near-term deadlines? And I'm so glad you asked that. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Anybody else have questions on loans versus grants or the city policy with that? Okay, then let's proceed. Other important details that we'd like you all to understand. Let's talk about area median income limits. Because we're offering 3 funding pools here, it's important that you understand awardees that will be using pro-housing funding and CDBG funds, that is no greater than 80% of the area median income can be used for those funds. However, the Affordable Housing Fund, that is a city fund, allows projects to go up to 100% of the area median income. If an applicant comes in and wants to use the entire funding bucket, so all of the pro-housing, all of the CDBG, all of the affordable housing funding, that is a welcome application, but you do have to note that no less than 70% of the funds must benefit low and moderate income persons. That is 80% AMI. That is a federal requirement. Deadlines for accomplishments, when we talked about what is that near deadline or near timelines, it is an interesting moving target because we have 3 different funding buckets here. CDBG, that is within 12 months, roughly. The Affordable Housing Fund, I put an asterisk there. We say 2 years, but really we'll work with you on what your project timeline is. And pro-housing, housing must be developed and completed, all accomplishments by the end of the grant term, which is 2029. Going to pause here. Are there any questions so far? Because I'm about to jump into some meaty slides about requirements with federal funds. This is a great opportunity to raise a hand and ask a question. Okay, I don't see any raised hands, so we will continue. We will have ample opportunity for live questions at the end. Now, bear with me with these requirements for federal funds slides. It's a lot of talking, but it is very important information that you understand as pro-housing and CDBG funds fall under these requirements. Okay, when we think about using federal funding, national objectives are the very first bar that we have to think about and cross. So we have 4 different criteria here. Low, moderate income, or LMI housing. The standard says that it means families and individuals whose incomes do not exceed 80% of the median income of the area involved, as determined by the Secretary, with adjustments for larger and smaller families. We post the HUD AMI or the HUD income limits on our website every year, and they are also included in the application that you will be accessing. So that is available for you to look at as reference. Other national objectives are LMI or low to moderate income benefits, such as economic development. That is not included in this application. LMI limited clientele and slum and blight, urban renewal, or urgent needs are also technically not included in this application, mostly just because we don't really have those designations in our area. When we think about low, moderate income housing, let's talk about rental projects. Rents in CDBG or pro-housing assisted rental projects must be set at levels which are affordable to LMI persons. The City of Bend typically uses the federal guideline that households not pay more than 30% of their income for rent and utilities. That is the standard. Each project must be undertaken in such a manner to ensure that rents are truly affordable to LMI persons. And the LMI household must occupy any one unit structure. One LMI household must occupy any 2-unit structure, and 51% of any structure with greater than 3 units must be occupied by LMI households. That is a mouthful. Those are just federal guidelines that I think those of you who develop rental housing are probably already really familiar with. Project records. What are you required to keep as a federal funding recipient? Evidence that you're meeting national objectives, financial records, progress reports. We ask all of our awardees to complete a final report that includes leverage information, how many other funds, what types of other funds did you use in your project? And records must be maintained for 4 years after that final payment and all pending matters are closed. Again, national objectives, measures, outcomes, and indicators. We'll just talk about this very briefly. Performance measures. When we report to HUD, these are some of the things that we have to report to HUD about your project. Are you creating suitable living environments, decent housing, or creating economic opportunities? Your project must fit with one of those performance measures. Similarly, your project outcome must fit in one of these 3 outcomes. Are you increasing availability or accessibility, affordability, or sustainability? And other indicators, we report to HUD how you've leveraged our funding that we provide, the HUD funding that was passed through to you, the number of persons that you've assisted, what were their income levels, race, ethnicity, and disability data. And for all awardees, we will provide the platform for you to know exactly what we need from you. And we will set up deadlines so that you know when we expect this information from you. In general, we don't ask for personally identifying information. That is something that we know that you collect on your clients, but anytime that we ask information from you, we request that personal identifying information is redacted. Program management standards. Other things that we look at in particular during application and in on-site monitoring are your internal controls, accounting records. All accounting records must be supported by source documentation. We look at allowable costs, loan servicing, cash depositories, and acquired real property. Any of you that are awarded federal funding, we will work with you if this isn't something you're familiar with to make sure that you understand how to show compliance with this. Furthermore, with internal controls, we will be requiring our awardees to provide evidence of all of these and provide an org chart with a definition of duties, system of authorization and supervision, adequate separation of duties, hiring and compensation policies to ensure that staff qualifications match job responsibilities. We will be looking for secure storage for accounting records with limited access. There'll be a periodical review of financial records, and we looked that our awardees have a policy about personal identifiable information and how it is protected. We will help provide guidance for this. Not everybody has all these systems understood or in place, and we will make sure that all the guidelines are understood by you. That's our job. If you're wondering what are some of the things that you need to have, we recommend if you have further questions, take the journey and look at 2 CFR 200. It is quite a meaty set of federal guidelines, but it explains really this framework that I'm explaining to you in a very brief way. In addition, we will be looking for a chart of accounts, cash receipts journal, disbursements, payroll journal, general ledger, and capacity requirement. When we talk about allowable costs, what does that mean? Well, under federal guidelines, we consider that to be necessary, reasonable, and directly related to CDBG or pro-housing funding. Let's just say any federal funding. Allowable costs must be authorized by the City of Bend. They must be consistently treated expenditure, must be allocable to the CDBG or the pro-housing fund. The cost has to be the net of applicable credits. So in other words, one of your subs can't make a profit from the charge and cost. The charge, that is a tongue twister for me, from costs charged. And your allowable costs can't be prohibited under federal, state, local laws or regulations. What are some ineligible costs? Well, under federal guidelines, all of these are ineligible. Buildings used for general conduct of government, purchase of construction equipment, purchase of personal property, furnishings, fixtures, or motor vehicles. I've heard in many trainings say anything on wheels. That is a no. Regular operating and maintenance expenses. Now, do you see my text here in red? Typically, new housing construction is not eligible with federal funds. That only applies if you're using CDBG funds. For the pro housing grant, we do have the special waiver, so it can be used for new housing construction. Other things that are ineligible are income payments, gift cards, cash payments, any car-related expenses, gas vouchers, car repairs, or political activities. When we talk about loan servicing, just a few things to know. The city does provide loan agreements with clear repayment terms and default definitions, descriptions of how defaults can be resolved, what actions will be taken if a loan is in default, and what is pledged as security for each loan. There will also be clear collection procedures for reconciliation for current amounts due, what happens if things are overdue, how do we collect overdue amounts and or writing off bad debts. Typically what happens is we draft loan documents and they are provided to you and your legal team for review. That is not the time, as I mentioned, to make large changes to loan terms. Those are already agreed on in the application process and city council approval. But this is an opportunity just to make sure that the loan terms are to your understanding. I see a hand up and or a Q&A in the box. We will get to that in just a moment. Okay. For CDBG and Pro Housing Fund, acquired real property. There are procedures to ensure compliance with national objectives when property is acquired or improved with more than $25,000. Program income from sales or rental of property is recorded and reported. Talk about legal compliance. There are many things that you need to understand with legal compliance with procurement and contracting, property management and disposition, fair housing and equal opportunity, compliance, labor standards, lead-based paint, political activity, again, is prohibited, and there must be a conflict of interest policy in place. Because the Pro Housing Fund is prioritized for land acquisition, we want to make sure that you all understand, because this land acquisition would be used with federal funds, an environmental review has to be completed. We talk about choice limiting actions. And in our notice to you and in the notice in the media, we mentioned that we ask that if you are applying for land acquisition, that you have an option to purchase or you have a purchase and sales agreement with language to state that the seller agrees to a 3 to 6 month buffer so that this environmental review process can be completed. If, as an example, you have a purchase and sales agreement on the day that you open your application and you fill out your application and you submit your application, you cannot complete the sale until after the funding application process happens, until you are notified that you receive your funding. You still can't make the purchase. It can only be completed when the environmental review is complete. We will do everything that we can to make sure that there are not undue time delays with this. But depending on the parcel of land in mention, this could take 3 to 6 months, maybe even a little bit longer. All of these things that we have to look at take time, and there are external consultations and partners that we communicate with. So I understand for some of you, we have had folks ask, this is a short notice and a short window, and we don't have enough time to have a PSA in place. We understand. What we will talk about in the Q&A portion is different options for a purchase and sales agreement. That could be an option. That could be a memorandum of understanding. All of that we'll talk about in the Q&A process when we get there. All this to say, you just need to understand that environmental review must be completed before the final transaction of the land acquisition can occur. We also want you to understand that there is legal compliance with the Uniform Relocation Act. In the event that your transaction or your project involves the relocation of persons living in housing, there must be a one-for-one housing replacement. If you have questions about this Relocation Act, we can provide more detailed information upon request. We're almost done with federal requirements. I do want you also to understand the City of Bend makes site visits to review program files and to monitor your processes just to make sure that all funds are under oversight and are being used in accordance with federal and city program requirements. Okay. We are at our question opportunity here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll turn on my camera so you can see my face. Okay. I am not able to turn on my camera, but let's take a look here. Rachel Baker, can you take the Q&As in the that have been submitted in the Q&A box, please?
So the first question was about near-term deadlines, and I believe you covered that in the slideshow after this question was answered.
Okay.
Melissa, will you be making this slideshow available to all the attendees?
Yes, I can email this out to all attendees and it'll also be posted on our website.
Correct. And those terms were for CDBG within 12 months. For affordable housing funding, it would need to be hopefully within 2 years. And for pro-housing funding, it would need to be by the end of the grant kind of term, which is that all units would need to be occupied and things completed by 2029. And then the second question is, are the funds dispersed on a reimbursement draw basis or funding in full at closing? So if it's a land acquisition, then you would get funding in full at that land acquisition closing. However, all others would be on a reimbursement basis. The other question was, are there expenditure deadlines for the three sources? And I think those are like those near terms that we discussed earlier. And finally, can you post an example of a city loan agreement? We could probably, those agreements are going to vary from kind of proposal to proposal, but we can give you kind of the basic bones of what a city loan agreement looks like um, in our probably next FAQ segment.
Thank you, Rachel. There were two questions that were asked of city staff prior to this webinar, and both agencies that asked the questions are not able to be with us today. So, Rachel, I'm going to ask it to you. One of the questions asked is, would the city be open to offering the Pro Housing Fund as a grant and not a loan?
So we still have our loans versus grant policy. However, we wanted to make clear in this presentation, and we hope you all understand that you can propose alternate terms in your application. And we recommend you do that if you would like something different than a loan, and you need to explain why, not only in your application, but in your presentation to AHAC. And potentially you might need to explain why in front of council if they ask questions, and we can make sure that you are there for that. We understand that the housing market is in a very weird spot right now, and that is why our loan versus grants policy created kind of space for alternative terms to be suggested. But I will say that the public questions this, and so you really have to have a clear answer, and you really have to have numbers that demonstrate your need for alternative terms.
Thank you,
And it
Rachel.
probably, just a final note, would not ever be a grant, but could be a loan potentially with a forgivable deadline if you had an extended period of affordability. So those would be kind of like the potential terms that you could request. Um, One thing, Melissa, that I want to make sure people understand is that you need to be a nonprofit with 501c3 status if you are applying for CDBG funds or pro-housing funds. You do not need to be a nonprofit with 503c status if you are applying for affordable housing funding.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. There were actually two more questions asked. And Daniel, I see your question submitted and I've seen it. We will get to it. Rachel, I had a developer ask, can we submit an application that asks for all of the funding, or should we be team player and ask for smaller amounts so that everybody can get something?
Please ask for whatever you need, whether that's all of the funding or an amount of the funding. Um, this funding is for what gets you across the finish line. You need to demonstrate the need. It can't be for something that would be nice or would help your organization. It needs to be for, we need the housing, and this can't happen without these funds.
Yes. And to piggyback on that, Rachel, the purpose of the Pro Housing Grant is to augment our smaller funding offerings or our regular offerings. And so to be able to say, find something that takes it all, that creates a very big creative legacy of housing in our community, that would be incredible. Um, that being said, our hope is to disperse as much of this funding as we can to make your development dreams come true right now, make that reach as big as possible. Rachel, there's one more question that I wanted us to chat about out loud before we get to Daniel's question. And it is, I touched on it very lightly about what if we can't get a purchase and sales agreement in time to apply for funding? There are different options that we can talk about with, I mentioned, can you get a memorandum of understanding? What are your timelines for getting a purchase and sales agreement in place? Can you give us a little bit more information on how an applicant could proceed if it's just not enough time to get a PSA?
Um, Again, you mentioned the memorandum of understanding. You could submit that in your application, and there are different like checkpoints along the way. Again, you present to AHAC, and that AHAC presentation, maybe you can have a purchase and sale agreement by that date or an option to purchase by that date. Maybe you could have a purchase and sale agreement by the time your proposal potentially gets recommended to council. Again, it kind of might determine whether your application is competitive or not. The more you have accomplished, the more you have things set in a row and, can demonstrate that you're ready to go with this project and like shovels in the ground as soon as your environmental review is complete, or if it's just affordable housing funding that would not be necessary, that you're going to have something ready to go as soon as the funding is there, the stronger your application will be. Um,
Yeah, and just I want to piggyback on that, Rachel, because um, I see another question about deadlines. And if, Rachel mentioned we're not looking for projects that would be a nice to have. So we can't accept land banking. So you can't get a parcel of land to say, well, we don't have the capacity and we don't have the staff to do this now, but we'll do it in 10 years. Each of those milestones, if you're using pro housing, you have to have construction completed with accomplishments, with people moved in by 2029, by December of 29, at the very, very, very latest. So that would mean then that your project has to be something that is real and something that is you have the capacity to do. Um, okay. Daniel asked a question about environmental review for land acquisition. Is it a phase one or does it require something more? Rachel, I see that you flagged that you'd like to answer that one.
so an environmental review, and I'm probably the right person to answer this one because I am the responsible entity for the city of Bend,
Yep.
is not just a phase one. It is a phase one and. So you'll get a phase one done and you'll also get a cultural survey done, and the city of Bend staff will also do all their own review of everything in the phase one and everything in the cultural survey. We have to take personal liability for that. And so another organization's work will be thoroughly reviewed and reviewed by the housing division before we make a determination of if your funded project can proceed.
Great. All right. I think we've answered all of the questions. Feel free to raise your
I see
hand.
Amy
Oh,
has her hand up.
great. Go ahead. I see the answer in the Q&A, but I don't see the hand up. But Amy, you asked, can you confirm that the COI policy only applies to the project funding and not the entire organization? Rachel, help us understand the conflict of interest policy and what it applies to.
So the conflict of interest policy applies to the organization. It would be the same as the CDBG policy. So a conflict of interest policy means that your organization cannot have a conflict of interest within its organization makeup to receive federal funding.
Okay, thank you. You still have time to submit questions. I would like you, oh, I do see some raised hands. Let me see how I can get these. Okay, Amy, I'm going to allow you to talk, and then Scott, you're going to be next. Go ahead, Amy.
Rachel just answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see here. Scott, did you still want to ask your question? If you do, please raise your hand. All right. Go ahead, Scott. You should have the okay now.
All right, Melissa, I have two. Thank you. First, there was a slide that showed the rent requirements, but rent be set to 30% of no more than 30% of someone's gross income. Are there similar policies for ownership and mortgage affordability?
that's a good question. That is the City of Bend's general policy when we do our underwriting for homeownership. Rachel, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I don't have anything to add
Yeah,
on that.
that is our standard policy.
Okay, and then a little more detailed, but for the pro housing specifically, when we get to the reporting phase, will the awardee be the primary organization doing the reporting, or will the City of Bend be the lead on the reporting with the awardee providing info and documentation?
Yeah, that's a good question, Scott. It'll be just like how we do CDBG. We will tell you what we need to report to HUD, and we will provide that platform for you to provide us with the information, and then we will report it to HUD on your behalf. And we're just that pass through or that liaison between HUD and the awardees.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. We got a couple more questions. Do you want me to cover these, Melissa?
Yeah, please go ahead. Thank you.
Will the applications need to demonstrate that projects are fully funded, but for the request? In other words, are these funds considered gap funding? Yes. Now, we wouldn't say don't apply if you're not gap funding, but we will say that gap funding projects or applications will be prioritized. And as a follow-up that means fully funded except this gap financing and LIHTC. I have seen applications submitted in front of our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee that had full funds except for gap funding and LIHTC. And because of the competition of the funding applications, even that was not funded by or recommended for funding because the LIHTC had not been secured. But it really depends on how competitive the applications are. So again, I'm not saying don't apply if this is kind of the initial funding that you need to get things started. I'm just going to say it's possible that there might be something out there that is a little bit more competitive because it has more secured financing.
Yeah, and I'll add to Rachel's answer that in the funding application, in the budget section, each funding source, you have the option to say whether you've applied for it, it is committed or secured. So you can make that distinction in your application at that time. We understand that this large amount of funding that we have put out right now, you haven't had a lot of notice for. So we ask that you just do the best you can with the information that you have. I do want to add also, while I don't see any additional questions or hand raised, you still have time. I do want to just explain something to you. The Pro Housing Grant and the Pro Housing Offering it's a planning grant that the City of Bend has decided to use 80% of the grant for this fund. The purpose of the grant was to be creative in solutions to the housing crisis. We understand funding is a main barrier to affordable housing, which is why we chose to use the majority of the grant in this way. What we're hoping to see is wildly creative proposals. So put together your best proposal with what you could feasibly do with the whole pot or little pieces of the pot. So what that means is, like Rachel said, if not everything is secured, explain it in your application. If taking the whole amount as a loan doesn't work for your project, explain it in your application. Don't count yourself out because you're not hearing 100% perfect fit. It all really depends on how competitive the application pool is, and we don't want anybody to count themselves out. So that being said, put together your best proposal, and we look forward to seeing what the options are and what you come up with. Are
I
there
don't see
any
any
last
more hands or
questions?
questions.
Okay. I'm going to give everybody just a second if there's any outstanding questions. So if you are wondering what is the next step, I do see an anonymous question about third-party reports. So Rachel, I'll let you get to that in just a second. As I mentioned, June 4th is when then City Council hears a resolution to formally offer the $4 million in the Pro Housing Award as this fund in a competitive application. If for some reason then City Council decides not to do that, we will notify everyone and let them know that that has changed, whether the timing has changed or the amounts have changed. Otherwise, if you don't hear back from us on June 5th, assume everything is in motion. Take a look at our affordable housing website in the developer resources section. In the accordion, there's all the information about the RFP and the pro housing grant. It says RFP on the website. It's not really an RFP. I mean, it's a funding application, but it's under the RFP accordion. Okay. And Rachel, unless she has something to add on the council timelines, there is one more question for you in the Q&A.
That question is, what third-party reports are required for the application? There are no third-party reports required for the application itself. However, I would recommend that if you are doing something that would require an environmental review, which includes a land acquisition, that you need to make sure you are getting that phase 1 done and that cultural survey done. And we're happy to help you with suggested ideas for third parties that can do those phase 1s or third parties that can do those cultural surveys. Can you think of any other reports, Melissa? You do the application stuff more so than I do.
Preliminary title report will be needed as well. And Rachel, on the note of the phase 1 and the cultural survey, can you talk a little bit about are those eligible funds that an applicant could ask for reimbursement for, or is the timing off? I know that I have heard applicants have concerns about the cost of those reports.
Yes, essentially, but it can't be before the council approval for reimbursement of those. And then I see also a market study or appraisal is required. That is also required. So yes, I believe is that in the application?
I will have to take a look. I'm glad that the anonymous attendee raised that question. I'll go take a look in the application and make sure that that is reflected. Okay. Any other questions? So pending council approval on June 4th, applications will open on June 5th. This is a great time for you to make sure that you have access to Neighborly. You'll need to create a new account for yourself if you aren't already in Neighborly. The application is not available for preview though until June 5th. If you are familiar with City of Bend application, as we mentioned, we're not creating anything new. We're using our existing application for this offering. So that'll kind of give you an idea of how to prepare and what content we're looking for. Only difference is that pro housing will be referenced in the application instead of other funding that we're not offering right now. So that, again, that opens on June 5th. If you have additional questions, please email them to housing@bendoregon.gov and put in the question or the subject line, the 2025 pro housing application or something to that effect. Your question will be answered, but then your question and answer will also be included in the next FAQ that is posted. So all today's questions will be in the FAQs posted tomorrow. And then questions from tomorrow to the next FAQ will be FAQ number 2, and we'll have one additional FAQ. Really what we're trying to avoid is frequent staff calls because we want to have everything documented to make it transparent for all applicants. So please submit your questions via email that way. Any last questions from the group or any last comments from Rachel? I see no hands raised. And no
I see
additional
no
Q&A.
additional questions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we thank you all for attending. We are really excited to see what kind of projects that you submit your applications for. And again, please just check our website, submit your questions to housing@bendoregon.gov, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks so much.